Hello, beautiful soul, and welcome back to another transformative episode of Healing Hearts Through Stories. I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend this time with me tonight, creating this sacred space for deep healing and peaceful rest. If this is your first time joining us, you've found a sanctuary where stories become medicine, where narrative becomes a pathway to profound inner transformation. Each episode is carefully crafted to guide you through a complete journey of healing, while gently preparing your mind and body for the most restorative sleep. Tonight, consciousness shifts to receive wisdom through tale, and in this receiving, you discover that your worth has never been dependent on another's decision to stay or go. The story that unfolds carries the frequency of remembrance, the vibration of your inherent completeness, the gentle truth that you are already holed out in. The quantum field of possibility, your story begins not with emptiness, but with fullness. Not with lack, but with abundance. Not with chasing, but with magnetic presence that draws authentic love naturally toward you. This is the space where healing stories emerge, where transformation becomes as natural as breathing, as inevitable as sunrise, where time bends and healing flows. We find our character emerging from the mists of old patterns, stepping into the light of new understanding. Through the portal of imagination, truth reveals itself in ways that bypass the mind's defenses, speaking directly to the heart that has grown tired of running, tired of pleading, tired of making itself small in dimensions unseen. Your journey toward wholeness unfolds with the grace of seasons changing, with the patience of mountains growing, with the gentle persistence of water carving canyons. Beyond the boundaries of linear time, healing stories emerge that speak to the eternal part of you that has always known your value, has always recognized your worth, has always understood that love flows toward you naturally when you stop blocking it with desperation. In the sacred space of narrative, transformation becomes possible in ways that feel both magical and completely natural. The story that unfolds tonight carries medicine for the part of you that has forgotten its own light, that has dimmed its own brilliance trying to make others comfortable, that has hidden its own beauty hoping others might stay. This is your invitation into healing, into remembering, into the gentle revolution of loving yourself so deeply that you never again need to chase anyone who chooses to leave. The story begins now in this moment of sacred surrender and this breath of possibility. In this quiet acknowledgement that you are ready to stop running after others and start walking toward yourself. In a coastal town where the ocean meets ancient cliffs, there lived a woman named Luna who had spent most of her adult life perfecting the art of pursuit. She possessed the rare gift of seeing the potential in everyone she met, the hidden light in the most guarded hearts, the possibility for connection where others saw only walls. Luna worked as a lighthouse keeper, tending to the beacon that guided ships safely to shore. Her days were filled with the rhythm of waves, the cry of seagulls, and the constant vigilance required to keep the light burning bright. Yet for all her skill at guiding others to safety, she had never learned to guide herself away from the dangerous rocks of one-sided love. Her cottage sat perched on the cliff's edge, windows facing the endless horizon where ships appeared and disappeared like the people in her life. The walls were lined with photographs of friends who had drifted away, lovers who had sailed on to other ports, family members who had found reasons to visit less and less. Each image told a story of Luna's desperate attempts to hold on to connections that were already dissolving. The lighthouse itself had become a metaphor for her existence, constantly sending out signals, constantly hoping someone would see her light and choose to stay. She had painted the exterior in warm, welcoming colors, planted gardens that bloomed in impossible beauty, and kept the beacon burning brighter than necessary, as if the extra luminosity might somehow convince passing ships to linger. Luna's routine revealed the pattern that had governed her life for decades. Each morning, She would check her phone for messages from people who rarely responded. She would craft carefully worded texts to friends who had grown distant, always striking the perfect balance between casual and caring, never wanting to seem too needy but desperate to maintain the connection. Her days were punctuated by small acts of giving that she hoped would inspire others to stay. She baked bread for neighbors who never reciprocated, sent thoughtful gifts to friends who forgot her birthday, and made herself available at all hours for anyone who needed support, even when her own heart was breaking from loneliness. The lighthouse keeper had become an expert at reading the signs of departure. She could sense when someone was pulling away before they even knew it themselves. The slight delay in response to messages, the cancellation of plans, the gradual decrease in enthusiasm, these signals sent her into a familiar panic, triggering an increase in her efforts to reconnect. Luna's greatest fear lived in the space between dusk and dawn, when the lighthouse beam swept across empty waters, and she wondered if she was fundamentally unlovable. She had constructed elaborate theories about why people left. Perhaps she was too intense, too caring, too available. Maybe she needed to be more mysterious, more aloof, more like the people who seemed to effortlessly attract others while she remained alone with her. Lighthouse. The cottage held evidence of her attempts to transform herself into someone others would choose to keep. Books on becoming more interesting, more attractive, more successful lined her shelves. She had tried being the cool girl, the supportive friend, the perfect partner, the understanding daughter, each identity an attempt to find the combination that would finally make someone stay. Her emotional landscape mirrored the dramatic coastline, where she lived periods of calm beauty interrupted by storms of anxiety when someone began to pull away. She had learned to ride these waves of panic, to navigate the treacherous waters of her own desperation, but she had never learned to find solid ground within herself. The lighthouse beam that swept across the ocean each night had become her prayer, her hope, her constant plea to the universe. Please let someone see my light and choose to stay. She had forgotten that lighthouses are not built to make ships stay in harbor. They are built to guide them safely on their journey, whether that journey leads towards shore or away from it. Luna's story was written in the language of longing, in the grammar of pursuit, in the syntax of self-abandonment. She had become fluent in the art of making herself smaller, dimmer, more convenient for others, not understanding that authentic love is drawn to authenticity, not to the performance of perfection. As the sun set on another day of tending to everyone else's needs while neglecting her own, Luna stood at her lighthouse window, watching the horizon for signs of incoming vessels. She had not yet learned that the most important ship she needed to guide to safety was her own heart, that the most crucial beacon she needed to tend was her own inner light, that the most valuable harbor she needed to protect was her own sense of worth. The ocean whispered secrets to the shore, but Luna had not yet learned to listen. The waves carried messages of surrender, of trust, of the natural ebb and flow of connection and solitude. The lighthouse stood as a beacon of service, not of desperation. But Luna had not yet understood the difference. Tonight, as the moon rose over the coastal town and the lighthouse beam began its eternal sweep across the waters, Luna's story of transformation was about to begin. The tide was changing, carrying with it the possibility of a new understanding about love, about worth, about the difference between guiding others with your light and desperately chasing them with your need. The coastal town of Serenity Bay existed. In that liminal space where land meets sea, where the solid gives way to the fluid, where the known dissolves into mystery. It was a place where the rhythm of tides governed daily life, where the residents had learned to dance with the eternal cycles of arrival and departure, of fullness and emptiness, of holding on and letting go. The town itself seemed designed by someone who understood the psychology of attachment and release. Streets curved like gentle embraces, leading visitors naturally toward the harbor or away from it, never forcing anyone to stay or go. Buildings were painted in soft, weathered colors that spoke of endurance without clinging, of beauty that didn't demand attention but simply existed in quiet confidence. The lighthouse where Luna lived stood on Beacon Point, the highest cliff overlooking the bay. It had been built by her great-grandfather, a man who understood that the purpose of a lighthouse was not to prevent ships from leaving, but to ensure they left safely. The structure itself embodied this wisdom, tall and steady, rooted deeply in stone, its light reaching far into the darkness without grasping or demanding. The lighthouse was painted in alternating bands of white and deep blue, colors that spoke to the marriage of earth and sky, of groundedness and aspiration. Its light was warm amber, the color of sunrise, of honey, of the golden hour when everything appears touched by magic. The beacon rotated in a slow, steady rhythm, offering guidance without urgency, presence without pressure. Around the lighthouse, Luna had created gardens that revealed her unconscious understanding of healthy relationship dynamics, even as she struggled to embody them in her human connections. She had planted native flowers that bloomed in their own season, that attracted butterflies and bees without effort, that gave their beauty freely without requiring anything in return. The gardens flourished because they followed natural law routes. Deep branches reaching toward light, each plant taking what it needed while contributing to the whole. The town below pulsed with the rhythm of a community that had learned to honor both connection and independence. The harbor welcomed ships of all sizes, from small fishing boats to grand sailing vessels, offering safe harbor without demanding commitment. The marina provided everything needed for repairs and provisioning, then released vessels to continue their journeys with blessings rather than attempts at persuasion. Serenity Bay's residents had developed a unique culture around healthy relationships. They celebrated arrivals without clinging to permanence, honored departures without taking them personally, and maintained connections that could stretch across oceans without breaking. The town's motto, carved in stone at the harbor entrance, read, "Welcome to all who seek harbor. Blessings to all who sail on." The local coffee shop, The Anchor, served as a gathering place where people could connect deeply without the pressure of forever. Conversations flowed like the tide, sometimes close and intimate, sometimes distant and thoughtful, always accepting the natural rhythm of human connection. The owner, an elderly woman named Pearl, had mastered the art of being fully present with each customer while holding no attachment to how long they stayed. The town's bookstore, Between the Lines, specialized in stories of transformation, of journeys both external and internal. Its shelves held tales of people who had learned to love themselves, to trust their own worth, to find completeness within rather than seeking it from others. The reading nooks were designed for solitude, comfortable chairs positioned to face the ocean, perfect for contemplating the vast possibilities that lay beyond the horizon. Even the weather in Serenity Bay seemed to teach lessons about attachment and release. Storms arrived with fierce intensity, demanding respect but not fear, then passed through, leaving the air cleaner and the light brighter. Fog rolled in like contemplative silence, muffling the world in peaceful isolation, then lifted to reveal views that took the breath away. The constant change of weather patterns mirrored the natural ebb and flow of human emotion, reminding residents that all states are temporary, all feelings are visitors. The beach below the lighthouse stretched in both directions, offering paths for walking alone or together, for moving toward connection or into solitude. The sand held footprints briefly, then released them to the waves, demonstrating the beauty of impermanence without the tragedy of loss. Shells and sea glass washed ashore as gifts from the ocean, treasures that could be collected and appreciated without diminishing the sea's vastness. The tide pools along the rocky shore revealed complete ecosystems that thrived in cycles of exposure and submersion, teaching profound lessons about resilience and adaptation. Each pool was a world unto itself, connected to the greater ocean, but complete in its own small space. The creatures within had learned to flourish in both solitude and connection, to receive what the tide brought while remaining anchored in their own chosen place. The lighthouse beam swept across a seascape that stretched beyond the horizon, reminding all who witnessed it that the world was vast and full of possibility. Ships appeared and disappeared like thoughts in consciousness, like people in a lifetime, like opportunities in a career. The light did not chase after departing vessels or desperately signal to empty waters. It simply maintained its steady presence, offering guidance to whatever vessels might need it. Luna's cottage, nestled at the base of the lighthouse, was surrounded by this landscape of natural wisdom. Every morning, she could witness the sunrise over water that held no memory of yesterday's storms, no anxiety about tomorrow's weather. Every evening, she could watch the sunset paint the sky in colors that existed for their own beauty, not for anyone's approval or attention. The energetic atmosphere of Serenity Bay vibrated with the frequency of healthy detachment, of love without possession, of service without sacrifice. It was a place where the difference between alone and lonely became clear, where solitude was recognized as a gift rather than a punishment, where the capacity to enjoy one's own company was understood as the foundation of all meaningful connection. This was the world that held Luna's story, the environment that would reflect her internal transformation, the backdrop against which she would learn to stop chasing ships and start appreciating the lighthouse she had always been. Luna's days began with the ritual of checking the modern Morse code of the digitally connected but emotionally isolated. Before her feet touched the floor, before her eyes fully opened to the morning light streaming through her cottage windows, her hand would reach for her phone, fingers already practiced in the choreography of hope and disappointment. The screen would illuminate to reveal the night's harvest of communication or lack thereof. Messages from people she had reached out to days ago, responses that came hours or sometimes days late, each delay a small wound that she had learned to bandage, with explanations that protected others from responsibility. "They're probably busy," she would whisper to herself, or "they're not good at texting," or "they're going through a hard time." Her morning routine had become a careful excavation of evidence, searching for signs of connection in the digital archaeology of her relationships. She would scroll through social media, noting who had been active overnight, who had shared posts but not responded to her messages, who had time to engage with others but not with her. Each observation was cataloged in the growing database of her insecurity, filed under the ever-expanding category of reasons why I'm not enough. The coffee she made each morning was always enough for two, a hopeful gesture that someone might stop by, that someone might choose to share the sunrise with her. More often than not, she would drink both cups herself, the second one growing cold as she worked in the lighthouse, a liquid reminder of her perpetual state of expectation. Luna's work as a lighthouse keeper provided the perfect metaphor for her approach to relationships. She tended to the beacon with obsessive dedication, checking and double-checking systems that were designed to function reliably with minimal intervention. She polished the lens until it gleamed, painted surfaces that didn't need painting, and maintained equipment that was already in perfect working order. Her hypervigilance about the lighthouse's condition mirrored her exhausting attention to the state of her relationships. When ships appeared on the horizon, Luna would adjust the lighthouse beam to be more welcoming, more visible, more impossible to ignore. She would stand at the window with binoculars, watching the vessel's movements, trying to discern whether they were heading toward her harbor or simply passing through. If a ship changed course away from Serenity Bay, she would immediately begin analyzing her own behavior. Had the light been too bright, too dim, too eager? Her cottage had become a museum of pursuit, filled with evidence of her attempts to make others stay, half-finished craft projects intended as gifts for friends who had lost interest. Books she had bought because someone mentioned wanting to read them, now gathering dust because the person had moved on to other interests. Photo albums organized and reorganized, trying to find the perfect combination of images that would remind departing friends of their good times together. Luna's phone contacts list read like a directory of relationships she had tried to resuscitate. Numbers she hadn't called in months but couldn't bring herself to delete. Group chats where she was the only one still posting, her messages floating in digital space like unanswered prayers. Email drafts she had written and rewritten, trying to find the perfect words that would inspire someone to reconnect. Her calendar revealed the pattern of availability that had become her identity. She kept weekends open just in case someone wanted to spend time with her. She said yes to invitations from acquaintances, hoping casual connections might develop into deeper friendships. She attended events she didn't enjoy, joined groups that didn't interest her, and volunteered for causes that didn't inspire her, all in the hope of finding someone who would see her value and choose to stay. The Lighthouse Logbook, where she recorded weather conditions and ship movements, had become a parallel journal of her emotional states. On days when friends were responsive, she noted clear skies and calm seas. When people were distant or unavailable, she recorded storms and rough waters. The meteorology of her inner world had become entirely dependent on the attention of others. Luna's shopping habits revealed her unconscious belief that she needed to earn love through giving. Her credit card statements showed a pattern of purchases designed to please others' expensive gifts for birthdays and holidays. Restaurant bills, where she always insisted on paying. Contribution to causes her friends supported, even when she couldn't afford it. She had become an expert at bankruptcy of the soul, spending emotional and financial resources she didn't have in pursuit of connection. Her sleep patterns reflected the anxiety of pursuit. She would lie awake composing messages she might send, rehearsing conversations she hoped to have, planning gestures that might win back someone's attention. When she finally fell asleep, her dreams were filled with scenarios of reunion, of being chosen, of finally being enough for someone to stay. The lighthouse beam swept across the ocean each night, and Luna had begun to see it as an extension of her own desperate reaching. She would stand at the window, watching the light stretch across the water, and feel the resonance of her own energy, constantly extended toward others, constantly giving, constantly hoping for reciprocation that rarely came. Her kitchen reflected the habits of someone who had learned to find comfort in feeding others. Recipes she had collected from friends who might visit. Specialty ingredients she kept in case someone with dietary restrictions stopped by. Always too much food because she cooked with the optimism of connection. The refrigerator was covered with photos of friends who had moved away, business cards from people who had promised to call, invitations to events that had already passed. Luna's behavior had become a finely tuned performance of indispensability. She had learned to be the friend who remembered birthdays, the person who checked in during difficult times, the one who showed up when others needed support. She had become addicted to being needed, mistaking usefulness for love, mistaking service for connection, mistaking exhaustion for devotion. The pattern was clear to everyone, except Luna herself. She had become a lighthouse that dimmed its own, light trying to make others comfortable. A beacon that had forgotten its purpose was to guide, not to chase. A source of illumination that had become desperate for reflection rather than confident in its own radiance. The pattern of pursuit that governed Luna's adult life had not begun with romantic relationships or friendships. It had roots that stretched back to her childhood, to the original wound that taught her love was something to be earned, not received. Luna's mother, Elena, had been a woman of extraordinary beauty and equally extraordinary inconsistency. She possessed the kind of magnetic presence that drew people into her orbit, but she had never learned to maintain relationships once the initial excitement faded. Elena's attention was like sunlight filtered through moving clouds, brilliant when it fell upon you, but unpredictable and impossible to hold. As a child, Luna had learned to read the subtle signs of her mother's moods, like a meteorologist studying weather patterns. When Elena was happy, the house filled with music and laughter, with spontaneous adventures and extravagant gestures of affection. These were the golden times when Luna felt truly loved, truly seen, truly valuable. But when Elena grew bored or restless, as she inevitably did, the light would withdraw, leaving Luna scrambling to understand what she had done wrong. Luna's father, Marcus, had been a quiet man who worked long hours at the shipyard, building vessels that would carry others to distant places while he remained anchored in routine. He loved his daughter deeply, but had never learned to express emotion in ways that a young girl could understand. His love was expressed through provision, through reliability, through the steady maintenance of their home and life. But Luna, already primed by her mother's inconsistency, interpreted his quiet presence as indifference. The lighthouse had been in Luna's family for generations, but it had also been the scene of her deepest childhood wound. When Luna was 8 years old, her parents had fought about Elena's desire to leave Serenity Bay, to pursue a life of adventure and possibility in distant cities. The argument had taken place in the lighthouse tower, their voices echoing off the curved walls as Luna hid on the stairs, listening to her world fracture. Elena had screamed that she felt trapped, that the lighthouse was a prison, that Marcus was holding her back from her true potential. Marcus had pleaded with her to stay, to think of their daughter, to remember the life they had built together. Luna had absorbed every word, learning that love was something you had to fight for, something that could be lost if you weren't careful enough, something that required constant vigilance to maintain. The morning Elena left, she had found Luna in the lighthouse tower, small and silent among the massive lens apparatus. Elena had knelt down, taken Luna's face in her hands, and spoken the words that would shape the rest of her daughter's life. "I love you, sweet girl, but sometimes love isn't enough to make someone stay. You'll understand when you're older." Luna had interpreted this message through the lens of childhood logic. If love wasn't enough to make her mother stay, then she must not have been lovable enough. If she had been a better daughter, more interesting, more worthy of attention, perhaps her mother would have chosen to remain. The 8-year-old girl had made a silent vow that she would become whatever anyone needed her to be, so that no one would ever leave her again. In the years that followed, Luna had perfected the art of being indispensable. She had become the perfect daughter for her grieving father, never causing trouble, always anticipating his needs, trying to fill the void left by Elena's departure. She had learned to be grateful for any attention, any affection, any sign that she mattered to someone. Elena's letters had arrived sporadically, postcards from exotic locations with brief messages about her adventures. Each one had been both a gift and a wound-proof that her mother was alive and thinking of her, but also evidence that Elena was choosing excitement over connection, freedom over family. Luna had saved every card, studying the images and words for clues about what kind of person her mother was becoming, what kind of life was worth abandoning a daughter to pursue. The pattern had crystallized in Luna's teenage years when she began forming friendships and romantic relationships. She had unconsciously sought out people who reminded her of her mother, charismatic, unpredictable, slightly out of reach. She had been drawn to the challenge of winning and keeping their attention, mistaking the anxiety of uncertainty for the excitement of love. Her first serious relationship had been with David, a traveling musician who had swept her off her feet with grand gestures and passionate declarations. Like her mother, David had been captivating when present, but frequently absent, always chasing the next opportunity, the next adventure. Luna had learned to live for the moments when he returned, to make herself so valuable during his brief visits that he would have to come back. When David had finally left for good, choosing a record deal in another city over a life with Luna, she had felt the familiar wound of abandonment. But instead of recognizing the pattern, she had concluded that she simply hadn't been enough, not talented enough, not interesting enough, not worth staying for. The solution, she had decided, was to become more giving, more available, more willing to sacrifice her own needs for others. The lighthouse had become her refuge and her prison, a place where she could control her environment, even when she couldn't control her relationships. She had thrown herself into maintaining the beacon, into perfecting the gardens, into creating a space so beautiful and welcoming that surely someone would choose to stay. But the pattern that had protected her as a child, the hypervigilance, the people-pleasing, the constant adaptation to others' moods, had become the very thing that drove people away in adulthood. Her intensity, her need, her inability to be alone without anxiety, had created an energy that repelled the very connection she desperately sought. Luna's protective strategy had become her prison. The little girl who had learned to chase after love had become a woman who couldn't stop running, even when running pushed others away. The lighthouse keeper who guided ships safely to harbor had never learned to create a safe harbor within herself. The original wound of abandonment had taught Luna that love was fragile, that connection was temporary, that her worth was determined by others' decisions to stay or go. She had spent 30 years perfecting the art of pursuit, not understanding that the very act of chasing had become the thing that made her uncatchable. The pattern that had governed Luna's life for 3 decades reached its breaking point on a Tuesday evening in October, as autumn storms gathered on the horizon and the lighthouse beam swept across increasingly turbulent waters. The catalyst was simple: a text message from her closest friend, Sarah, delivered with the casual cruelty of modern communication. "Hey, I think I need some space. Nothing personal. Just need to focus on myself right now." Luna stared at the message, her hands trembling as she read it again and again, searching for hidden meaning, for some explanation that would make sense of this sudden abandonment. Sarah had been her anchor for the past 5 years, the one person who had seemed immune to the restlessness that eventually claimed all of Luna's relationships. They had shared everything: late-night conversations, weekend adventures, the kind of deep emotional intimacy that Luna had thought meant forever. The immediate response was familiar: panic, followed by the desperate need to fix whatever had gone wrong. Luna's fingers flew over her phone's keyboard, composing and deleting messages, trying to find the perfect combination of words that would bring Sarah back. She wanted to ask what she had done wrong, to promise she would change, to offer whatever. Sarah needed to reconsider, but for the first time in her life, something held her back. Standing in the lighthouse tower, surrounded by the machinery of guidance and navigation, Luna felt the weight of her own pattern crashing down upon her. She could see it all laid out before her like a map of familiar territory: the urgent need to pursue, the willingness to sacrifice her own needs, the desperate belief that if she just tried harder, gave more, became different, she could make someone stay. But looking out at the storm-tossed ocean, watching ships navigate through the darkness by their own instruments rather than clinging to the lighthouse beam, Luna began to see something she had never noticed before. The ships that used her lighthouse most effectively were the ones that took what they needed and moved on. They didn't try to build permanent docks at the base of her cliff. They didn't demand that she adjust her light to their personal preferences. They simply received her guidance and continued their journeys, trusting in their own navigation systems. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had been trying to make herself into a harbor, when she was meant to be a lighthouse. She had been attempting to create permanent moorings for people who were meant to be free, and in doing so, she had exhausted herself and frustrated them. The very act of trying to make others stay had created the suffocating energy that drove them away. Luna sank into the chair beside the lighthouse controls, her body finally succumbing to the exhaustion of decades of pursuit. She felt the familiar urge to call Sarah, to drive to her house, to demand an explanation that would help her understand what she had done wrong. But alongside the familiar panic, something new was emerging, a quiet voice that asked a different question entirely. What if nothing is wrong? The voice whispered, what if Sarah's need for space has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with her own journey? What if people leaving isn't a reflection of your value, but simply a natural part of the human experience? The concept was so foreign to Luna's worldview that she initially rejected it. Her entire identity had been built on a foundation that she was responsible for others' decisions to stay or go, that she could influence their choices through her behavior, that love was something earned through perfect performance. But sitting in the lighthouse tower, watching the storm rage outside, she began to consider an alternative reality. What if she had been chasing people not because she loved them, but because she was afraid of being alone with herself? What if her constant giving had been an attempt to buy love rather than express it? What if the lighthouse beam that swept across the ocean each night was supposed to be a metaphor for her own inner radiance, not a desperate signal for others to notice her? The questions came like waves, each one carrying the potential for either drowning or cleansing. Luna felt the solid ground of her old beliefs beginning to shift beneath her feet. The story she had told herself about love, about worth, about the nature of human connection, all of it was being called into question by the simple act of someone asking for space. As she sat in the lighthouse tower, Luna became aware of a sensation she hadn't experienced in decades: curiosity about solitude. What would it feel like to spend an evening without checking her phone, without crafting messages to maintain connections, without the constant background anxiety of wondering who might be pulling away? What would it be like to tend to her own needs with the same dedication she had given to others? The lighthouse beam continued its steady rotation, indifferent to the storm, unconcerned with whether ships chose to approach or sail by. It simply maintained its presence, offering guidance without attachment, service without sacrifice. For the first time, Luna wondered if she could learn to be like the lighthouse she tended, steadfast in her own value, generous in her offering, but unattached to the outcome. Sarah's request for space had created a crack in the wall of Luna's old pattern, a fissure through which new possibilities could enter. The familiar urge to chase was still there, but alongside it was growing something unexpected: relief. Relief at the thought of not having to monitor someone else's moods, not having to calibrate her own behavior to maintain another's interest, not having to carry the impossible responsibility of making someone else happy. As the storm reached its peak and the lighthouse beam cut through the darkness, Luna felt herself standing at the threshold of a new way of being. She could continue down the familiar path of pursuit, or she could choose something radically different. She could learn to be the lighthouse rather than the ship, desperately seeking harbor in others. The choice lay before her like two paths diverging in the darkness, and for the first time in her life, Luna felt ready to choose the path that led home to herself. The morning after Sarah's message, Luna awoke to an unusual stillness. The storm had passed, leaving behind the kind of crystalline clarity that follows emotional upheaval. As she prepared her usual 2 cups of coffee, she found herself pausing before the second cup, really looking at it for the first time. The ritual she had performed thousands of times suddenly seemed absurd: making coffee for someone who wasn't there, hoping for someone who might not come, preparing for a connection that existed only in her imagination. Instead of pouring the second cup, Luna walked outside with her single mug, stepping into the morning air that smelled of salt and possibility. The garden around her lighthouse was in full autumn bloom, Flowers that had grown and flourished without her constant attention. Plants that had found their own rhythm of growth and rest. As she walked among them, she noticed something she had never seen before. The most beautiful flowers were the ones that stood alone, not reaching toward others for support, but rooted deeply in their own soil. A voice spoke from behind her, gentle and weathered like driftwood polished by decades of waves. Those cosmos are particularly stunning this year. They've learned the secret of blooming without begging for attention. Luna turned to find an elderly woman she had never seen before, though the woman seemed to know the garden intimately. She was perhaps 70, with silver hair that caught the morning light and eyes that held the depth of someone who had weathered many storms. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a basket filled with shells and sea glass. "I'm Marina," the woman said, extending her hand. "I've been watching your lighthouse for many years, though we've never formally met. I live in the cottage just beyond the bend, where the coast turns wild." Luna shook Marina's hand, feeling an unexpected warmth flow between them. "I'm Luna. I don't think I've ever seen your cottage." Marina smiled. "It's tucked back in the trees, invisible unless you know exactly where to look. I'd prefer it that way, hidden but not hiding, private but not isolated. There's a difference. You know." They walked together through the garden, Marina pausing occasionally to examine a particular flower or to collect a piece of sea glass from the path. Her presence was remarkably calming, like being near a still pond that reflected the sky perfectly. "I used to keep a lighthouse too," Marina said, settling onto a bench that overlooked the ocean. "Different coast, different time, but the same essential purpose. I spent many years believing my job was to make ships want to stay, to create such a welcoming harbor that vessels would choose to make my shore their permanent home." Luna felt her heart quicken. "What happened?" "I exhausted myself trying to be everything to everyone. I made my light brighter, my harbor more sheltered, my services more comprehensive. I thought if I just gave enough, loved enough, tried enough, I could make someone choose to stay forever." Marina's voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "But lighthouses aren't meant to be destinations, Luna. They're meant to be guides." The simple statement hit Luna like a revelation. She had been trying to make herself into a destination when her true nature was to be a guide. She had been attempting to create permanent harbors when her gift was to offer temporary sanctuary and safe passage. "How did you learn the difference?" Luna asked. Marina picked up a piece of sea glass from her basket, holding it up to the light. This piece was once a bottle, probably thrown into the ocean by someone who thought it was worthless. The waves tumbled it, the sand polished it, and time transformed it into something beautiful. But notice, the ocean didn't chase after the bottle, didn't beg it to become sea glass. The ocean simply provided the conditions for transformation and allowed the process to unfold naturally. Luna studied the translucent green glass, seeing how the harsh edges had been worn smooth, how the opacity had become luminous. "You're saying I've been trying to force transformation instead of allowing it." "I'm saying you've been taking responsibility for other people's journeys instead of focusing on your own. When someone leaves your harbor, do you trust that they're following their own navigation system? Or do you assume you've failed as a lighthouse?" The question pierced through decades of conditioning. Luna realized she had never once considered that someone's departure might have nothing to do with her worth and everything to do with their own path. She had been interpreting every goodbye as a personal failure rather than a natural part of the human journey. "I spent 15 years chasing after a ship captain," Marina continued, her voice soft with memory. "Samuel was his name. He would dock at my lighthouse every few months, and I lived for those visits. I would prepare for weeks, making everything perfect, trying to give him reasons to stay longer each time. When he finally stopped coming, I was devastated. I thought I had done something wrong, that I wasn't enough to make him choose my harbor over all the others. Marina paused, watching a seagull ride the wind currents effortlessly. Years later, I learned that Samuel had fallen in love with a woman in another port, had started a family, had chosen to limit his voyages to shorter routes that allowed him to be home more often. His decision to stop visiting my lighthouse had nothing to do with me and everything to do with his own growth, his own changing priorities, his own journey toward love. Luna felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of a knot she had carried for so long she had forgotten it was there. How did you learn to stop chasing? I started by getting curious about my own company. I began to ask myself what I enjoyed when no one else was around to please or impress. I discovered that I loved to collect sea glass, to study the tides, to watch the way light changed throughout the day. I found that my own presence was actually quite pleasant when I wasn't constantly monitoring someone else's mood or availability. The concept seemed revolutionary to Luna. She tried to remember the last time she had done something purely for her own enjoyment, without considering how it might make her more interesting to others or create opportunities for connection. The lighthouse still guided ships, Marina continued, but I stopped trying to control their destinations. I focused on maintaining the best possible light, keeping the equipment in perfect working order, tending to my own little piece of coast, with love and attention. And something remarkable happened. Ships began seeking out my harbor, not because I was chasing them, but because the quality of guidance I offered was exceptional. Luna felt tears gathering in her eyes. But what if I'm meant to be alone? What if no one ever chooses to stay? Marina turned to face her fully, her eyes kind but direct. Oh, sweetheart, you've been asking the wrong question all along. The question isn't whether someone will choose to stay. The question is, who are you when you're not performing for an audience? What kind of lighthouse do you become when you stop dimming your light to make others comfortable? The old woman reached into her basket and pulled out a piece of sea glass unlike any Luna had ever seen, perfectly clear, like crystallized moonlight. This one is rare. It came from a very old bottle, something special that someone treasured. The ocean didn't try to make it into anything other than what it was meant to become. It simply provided the conditions for its true nature to emerge. Marina placed the clear sea glass in Luna's palm. Your true nature isn't to chase or cling or persuade. Your true nature is to be a lighthouse, steady, radiant, helpful to those who need guidance, but complete in yourself whether ships arrive or not. Luna closed her fingers around the sea glass, feeling its smooth warmth. For the first time in her adult life, she began to imagine what it might feel like to be enough exactly as she was, to offer her gifts without attachment to how they were. Received, to love without the desperate need to be loved in return. Will you teach me? Luna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marina smiled, the expression transforming her face into something luminous. I'll share what I've learned, but the real teacher is already inside you. She's the part of you that has always known your worth, the part that has been waiting patiently for you to stop running long enough to listen. She's been there all along, as steady and reliable as the lighthouse beam, just waiting for you to come home to yourself. As they sat together on the bench overlooking the vast ocean, Luna felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, complete peace in the present moment. No urgency to check her phone, no anxiety about someone's response or lack thereof. No need to plan her next move to maintain someone's interest. Just the simple pleasure of being alive in her own skin, breathing her own breath, feeling her own heartbeat. The lighthouse behind them continued its eternal rotation, offering guidance to any ships that might need it, but demanding nothing in return. For the first time, Luna understood that this was not a metaphor for her life. This was her life, had always been her life. She had simply forgotten how to be the lighthouse and had been trying instead to be the ship, always seeking harbor in others instead of offering harbor from her own solid ground, Marina stayed until the sun reached its zenith, sharing stories of her own journey from pursuit to presence, from need to offering, from emptiness to fullness. When she finally rose to leave, Luna felt no panic, no urge to make plans for another meeting, no need to secure promises of future connection. "Will I see you again?" Luna asked, not from desperation but from genuine affection. "Whenever the tide brings us together," Marina replied. "But now you know the secret. You're complete whether I return or not. That's what makes our connection real instead of just necessary." As Marina disappeared around the coastal bend, Luna remained on the bench, holding the piece of clear sea glass and feeling something unprecedented: excitement about spending time alone with herself. The first experiment began that very afternoon. Luna stood in her cottage, phone in hand, staring at Sarah's message from the day before. The familiar urge to respond rose like a tide, to ask for clarification, to apologize for whatever she had done wrong, to offer compromises that might bring Sarah back. But Marina's words echoed in her mind. What kind of lighthouse do you become when you stop dimming your light to make others comfortable? Instead of crafting a response, Luna set her phone aside and asked herself a question she had never considered. What do I want to do with this afternoon that has nothing to do with anyone else? The silence that followed felt vast and unfamiliar. For so long, her desires had been calibrated to others' needs, her interests shaped by what might make her more appealing to friends or partners. She realized with shock that she wasn't sure what she enjoyed purely for herself. Walking through her cottage with new eyes, Luna began to notice things that sparked curiosity rather than social opportunity. A set of watercolors she had bought years ago, but never used because no one she knew was interested in art. A stack of astronomy books that had gathered dust because none of her friends shared her fascination with stars. A guitar that had been silent in the corner because she had been too embarrassed to practice in front of others. She chose the watercolors. Settling at her kitchen table with a glass of water and a few brushes, Luna attempted to paint the view from her window: the lighthouse, the garden, the endless ocean beyond. Her first efforts were clumsy, the colors muddy and imprecise. The old Luna would have been frustrated, would have worried about what others might think of her amateur attempts. But this afternoon, she found herself genuinely engaged in the process rather than the outcome. As she painted, her phone buzzed with a text from another friend, Marcus, asking if she wanted to join a group dinner that evening. The old pattern would have been immediate acceptance. Any invitation was better than an evening alone. But Luna paused, brush still wet with blue paint, and checked in with herself. Did she want to go? The answer surprised her. Not really. She was enjoying the quiet discovery of painting, the way the afternoon light moved across her cottage walls, the simple pleasure of being absorbed in creation rather than connection. For the first time in her adult life, Luna declined a social invitation, not because she was busy, but because she was genuinely content with her own company. The evening that followed felt like stepping into an alternate universe. Luna prepared dinner for one, a simple meal that she actually enjoyed rather than something designed to impress. She ate slowly, tasting the food instead of rushing through it while monitoring her phone. She lit candles not for ambience to share with someone else, but simply because she liked the way they made the cottage feel warm and peaceful. After dinner, instead of scrolling social media or crafting messages to distant friends, Luna took her guitar to the lighthouse tower. The circular room with its massive lens provided perfect acoustics, and she spent an hour remembering how to play, her fingers slowly recalling melodies she had abandoned years ago. The music was imperfect, hesitant, but it was hers. As she played, Luna became aware of a sensation she had almost forgotten: contentment without external validation. She wasn't performing for anyone, wasn't hoping someone would hear and be impressed. wasn't using music as a way to attract or maintain connection. She was simply enjoying the act of creation, the feeling of sound flowing through her fingers, the way the lighthouse seemed to hum in harmony with her simple melodies. The next few days brought a series of small experiments in self-companionship. Luna took long walks along the beach without photographing them for social media. She read books that interested her rather than ones that might make her seem more intellectual to others. She cooked elaborate meals just for herself, savoring flavors she had never taken time to notice when she was focused on pleasing others. Each experiment revealed how much of her life had been performance. Her bookshelves were filled with titles she thought made her look sophisticated, rather than stories that actually engaged her. Her closet contained clothes chosen to attract others' attention, rather than garments that made her feel comfortable and authentic. Even her hobbies had been selected based on their social potential, rather than genuine interest. One evening, while practicing guitar in the lighthouse tower, Luna heard a ship's horn in the distance. Her old instinct was to rush to the window, to adjust the lighthouse beam, to see if the vessel might choose to dock at Serenity Bay. Instead, she continued playing, trusting that the lighthouse's automated systems would provide whatever guidance the ship needed. The horn sounded again, closer this time, but Luna remained focused on her music. She was learning to distinguish between being helpful and being desperate, between offering service and seeking validation. The lighthouse would do its job whether she monitored every ship or not. As the weeks passed, Luna noticed changes that surprised her. Her garden, which she had always maintained obsessively to impress visitors, began to reflect her personal aesthetic rather than some imagined ideal of what others might find attractive. She planted herbs she enjoyed cooking with, flowers in colors that made her happy, vegetables she actually wanted to eat. The cottage itself began to transform. Luna removed photographs of friends who had drifted away, not from anger, but from a desire to focus on the present rather than past connections. She rearranged furniture to please herself rather than to facilitate entertaining others. She bought art supplies and books and music that reflected her emerging understanding of her own tastes. Her relationship with technology shifted dramatically. The constant checking of phones, the anxiety-inducing scroll through social media, the careful crafting of messages designed to maintain connections, all of it began to feel foreign and exhausting. Luna found herself naturally spending less time online, more time engaged with physical activities that brought genuine satisfaction. The most surprising change was in her relationship with solitude. The silence that had once felt empty and threatening began to feel spacious and nourishing. Evenings alone, which had been endured as temporary states between social connections, became something she looked forward to. She discovered that her own company was actually quite pleasant. When she wasn't constantly wishing she were elsewhere, Luna began to understand the difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness was the ache of feeling disconnected from others while being disconnected from herself. Aloneness was the fullness of being completely present in her own life, engaged with her own interests, content in her own skin. The lighthouse beam continued its nightly rotation, but Luna no longer watched it with the desperate hope that it might attract someone to stay. Instead, she began to see it as a reflection of her own inner radiance, steady, reliable, generous, but complete in itself, whether witnessed or not. 3 weeks into her experiment with self-companionship, Luna received a text from an old friend, asking if she was okay because she had been so quiet lately. The question amused her because she had never felt more okay, more alive, more authentically herself. She was quiet because she was listening to her own voice, to her own desires, to the wisdom that emerged when she stopped filling every moment with the noise of pursuit. Her response was simple: "I'm wonderful. Thank you. Just learning to enjoy my own company." The friend's reply revealed everything. Luna needed to know about the difference between her old life and her new one. That sounds lonely. But it didn't sound lonely to Luna anymore. It sounded like coming home. The breakthrough arrived on a morning when autumn was surrendering to winter, carried on the wings of an unexpected visitor. Luna was in her lighthouse tower, practicing a new song on her guitar, when she heard the distinctive sound of a ship's engine, not the distant rumble of vessels passing by, but the specific puttering of someone maneuvering into the harbor. Through the tower windows, she could see a small sailboat approaching Serenity Bay, its single occupant skillfully navigating the morning swells. Luna's first instinct was the familiar flutter of excitement. Someone was choosing her harbor, seeking her lighthouse, potentially offering the connection she had always craved. But as she watched the boat approach, something remarkable happened. Instead of rushing to the window, instead of adjusting her appearance or preparing to be the perfect host, Luna simply continued playing her guitar. She observed her own response with fascination. The old urgency was there, but it felt distant, like an echo from another life. The sailboat dropped anchor near the small dock below, and Luna could see its captain securing the rigging with practiced efficiency. He appeared to be middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered hands of someone who had spent years working with rope and wind. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a person comfortable with solitude. Luna finished her song and made her way down from the tower, not rushing, but walking at her own natural pace. She found the sailor sitting on her dock, sketching the lighthouse in a worn notebook. He looked up as she approached, his eyes crinkling with the kind of smile that came from genuine contentment rather than social performance. "Beautiful morning," he said simply, his voice carrying the calm of someone who was accustomed to the rhythm of waves and weather. "It is," Luna agreed, settling onto the dock beside him without invitation or apology. The old Luna would have worried about being presumptuous, would have asked permission, would have immediately begun the dance of accommodation. This Luna simply sat down because it felt natural to do so. "I'm James," he said, continuing to sketch while they talked. "I anchor here every few years when I'm sailing up the coast. Your lighthouse has always been a reliable friend to solo sailors." Luna introduced herself, and they fell into the kind of easy conversation that flows naturally between people who are comfortable with themselves. James told her about his sailing adventures, not to impress her, but simply because she showed genuine interest. Luna shared stories about lighthouse keeping, not to make herself seem interesting, but because his questions were thoughtful and engaged. What struck Luna most profoundly was how different this interaction felt from every other encounter she had experienced in years. There was no subtext of pursuit or possession, no undercurrent of need or desperation. James was fully present for their conversation, but he wasn't trying to extract anything from her beyond the simple pleasure of human connection. As they talked, Luna realized she was experiencing something unprecedented, attraction without attachment. She found James interesting, enjoyed his company, appreciated his stories and perspectives. But underneath her engagement was a bedrock of contentment with her own life that didn't require him to stay, to be more than he was, or to fill any empty spaces within her. When James mentioned that he would be sailing on with the next tide, Luna felt neither disappointment nor the urge to convince him to stay longer. Instead, she felt grateful for the morning's connection and curious about his continued journey. "Would you like to see the lighthouse tower?" she offered. "The view from the top is spectacular." They climbed the spiral stairs together, James pausing to examine the mechanics of the beacon with genuine appreciation. At the top, they stood together looking out over the vast ocean, the horizon stretching endlessly in all directions. "You can see why sailors love lighthouses," James said. "Not because they make us want to stop sailing, but because they remind us that there are safe harbors when we need them. reliable guides when we're lost, steady lights in the darkness. Luna felt something click into place, a final piece of understanding that completed a puzzle she had been working on for weeks. "I used to think my job was to make people want to stay," she said. "I thought if I just made my harbor attractive enough, comfortable enough, irresistible enough, people would choose to make it their permanent home." James nodded thoughtfully. "But that would defeat the purpose of a lighthouse, wouldn't it? The goal isn't to create a place so comfortable that people never want to leave. The goal is to provide what's needed for safe passage, whether someone is arriving or departing." The simplicity of the statement hit Luna like a revelation. She had been trying to create dependency when her true gift was to offer independence. She had been attempting to build prisons of comfort when her purpose was to provide wings of confidence. "I've spent my whole life trying to make myself indispensable," Luna said, the words carrying the weight of newfound understanding. "But indispensable means people can't function without you. That's not love, that's limitation." James smiled, his eyes reflecting approval of her insight. Real love wants the other person to thrive, even if that thriving takes them somewhere else, especially if it takes them somewhere else. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the wind patterns on the water below. Luna felt a profound shift occurring within her, as if the tectonic plates of her identity were rearranging themselves into a new configuration. She was discovering that the opposite of clinging wasn't indifference, it was freedom. The opposite of pursuit wasn't abandonment, it was trust. "I used to believe that if someone left, it meant I wasn't enough," Luna continued. "But maybe when someone leaves, it means they're becoming more themselves, following their own navigation system, trusting their own inner lighthouse." "Now you're thinking like a sailor," James said with approval. "We don't leave harbors because they're inadequate. We leave because the open water is calling, because there are other ports to explore, because movement is part of our nature." Luna felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of recognition, of coming home to a truth she had always known but had been afraid to embrace. People left not because she was inadequate, but because leaving was part of their journey. People stayed not because she convinced them to, but because their own path temporarily aligned with hers. "Thank you," she said to James, though she knew he was simply reflecting back the wisdom she had been developing within herself. When the tide turned and James prepared to leave, Luna felt no urge to delay his departure or extract promises of future contact. She helped him with his lines, wished him fair winds, and watched his sailboat disappear beyond the horizon with a heart full of gratitude rather than empty, with lost dots standing alone on her dock as the sun reached its zenith. Luna experienced the most profound moment of her transformation. She was alone, but she was not lonely. Someone had left, but she had not been abandoned. She was single, but she was complete. The lighthouse beam that would begin its rotation with evening no longer felt like a desperate signal for others to notice her. It felt like an expression of her own inner radiance, a gift she offered to the world whether anyone was there to receive it or not. Luna walked back through her garden, seeing the flowers with new eyes. Each bloom stood in its own space, rooted in its own soil, reaching toward the sun with its own timing. The flowers didn't chase after bees or demand that butterflies stay longer than their nature dictated. They simply offered their beauty and nectar to whoever needed it, then continued blooming for their own joy. For the first time in her adult life, Luna understood that she was like those flowers, complete in herself, generous in her offering, radiant in her own natural timing. The person she had been seeking in others had been living inside her all along, patient and steady as a lighthouse beam, waiting for her to stop chasing long enough to come home to herself. Luna's life began to rebuild itself around the architecture of self-completeness, like a house designed by someone who finally understood that every room should serve the inhabitants' authentic needs rather than impress potential visitors. The changes were both subtle and revolutionary, altering the fundamental rhythm of her daily existence while maintaining the outward structure of her lighthouse keeping duties. Her mornings transformed first. Instead of reaching immediately for her phone to check for overnight messages, Luna began each day with a practice Marina had suggested: 5 minutes of simply breathing and acknowledging her own presence. "Good morning, Luna," she would whisper to herself, the greeting carrying the warmth she had once reserved for others. This simple ritual established her relationship with herself as the primary connection of each day. The coffee ritual evolved naturally. Rather than automatically making 2 cups out of hopeful habit, Luna mindfully prepared exactly what she wanted. Some mornings, this meant a single perfect cup savored slowly while watching the sunrise. Other mornings, she chose tea, or hot chocolate, or nothing at all. The kitchen counter no longer held the shrine to absent others. No second cup waiting. Hopefully, no extra plates set out just in case. Her cottage began to reflect authentic preferences rather than imagined ideals. Luna removed the decorative items she had collected because they seemed sophisticated or because someone had admired them. In their place, she chose objects that sparked genuine joy-smooth stones from beach walks, her own watercolor attempts. Framed simply, books she actually wanted to read displayed openly rather than hidden in favor of impressive titles she never opened. The lighthouse maintenance shifted from anxious perfectionism to loving stewardship. Luna still kept the equipment in excellent condition, but she no longer polished every surface to desperate shininess or checked systems that were functioning perfectly. Her care became efficient and respectful rather than obsessive and performance-driven. The lighthouse didn't need her anxiety to function properly. It needed her competence and attention. Luna's relationship with the garden revealed the most profound changes. Instead of maintaining it as a stage set for potential visitors, she began growing what brought her personal satisfaction. She planted herbs for cooking experiments, flowers in colors that made her smile, vegetables she was curious to taste. When a section didn't thrive, she felt interest rather than failure, adjusting conditions or trying different plants with the patient curiosity of someone in relationship with natural cycles, rather than demanding immediate perfection. Her evening routines created a sanctuary of self-companionship. Luna developed rituals that honored her own presence, lighting candles for their beauty rather than their romantic potential, preparing meals with attention to flavors she enjoyed, choosing activities based on genuine interest rather than their social media potential. She read books that fed her curiosity, practiced guitar without worrying about mistakes, painted watercolors that pleased her eye, regardless of their technical merit. The most significant change was in her relationship with plans and schedules. Luna stopped keeping her calendar perpetually open in case someone wanted to spend time with her. Instead, she began making plans with herself: evening painting sessions, weekend beach walks, morning photography expeditions. When friends invited her to activities, she checked in with her own desires rather than automatically accepting out of fear that declining might lead to future exclusion. This new approach to social invitations revealed a surprising discovery. When Luna responded from genuine interest rather than desperate availability, her connections became more authentic. Friends began to see her as a person with her own life and preferences rather than someone who would always say yes. The quality of her friendships improved as the quantity of her social obligations decreased. Luna's phone habits transformed organically. The constant checking, the anxiety when responses were delayed, the careful crafting of messages designed to maintain interest, all of it began to feel foreign and exhausting. She found herself naturally spending less time on social media, more time engaged with physical activities that provided immediate satisfaction. When she did communicate with friends, Her messages became more genuine and less calculated. Her financial habits reflected the deeper shift from seeking external validation to honoring internal values. Luna stopped spending money on expensive gifts designed to maintain others' affection, ceased paying for meals and activities she couldn't afford in hopes of seeming generous, ended subscriptions to services that were meant to make her more appealing to others. Instead, she invested in art supplies, books, music, and experiences that supported her own growth and enjoyment. The lighthouse beam's nightly rotation became a meditation on her new understanding. Each evening, as the light began its steady sweep across the darkening waters, Luna would pause in whatever activity was bringing her pleasure and acknowledge the metaphor. The beam offered guidance without grasping, service without sacrifice, presence without desperation. It was complete in itself, whether ships appeared or not. Luna's sleep improved dramatically as the anxiety of constant social monitoring decreased. No longer lying awake composing messages or reviewing conversations for signs of others' disinterest, she found herself naturally tired at bedtime, grateful for the day's authentic experiences, peaceful in the knowledge that she had honored her own needs and offered genuine service to others, without attachment to their response. Her dreams began to change as well. Instead of anxiety scenarios about being abandoned or rejected, Luna's sleeping mind began to explore themes of adventure, creativity, and discovery. She dreamed of sailing her own ship, of painting masterpieces, of conversations with interesting strangers who appeared and disappeared naturally without causing distress. The weather, which had once reflected her emotional dependence on others, moods became simply weather. Rainy days were opportunities for indoor activities she enjoyed rather than metaphors for her emotional state. Sunny days were gifts to be appreciated rather than pressure to be social. Storms became spectacular natural events to witness from the safety of her lighthouse rather than external confirmations of her internal turmoil. Luna's health improved as the chronic stress of pursuit diminished. Her appetite returned to natural patterns, eating when hungry, stopping when satisfied, choosing foods that nourished rather than comforted the anxiety of potential abandonment. Her energy increased as she stopped expending it on the exhausting work of trying to control others' decisions about staying or leaving. Most surprisingly, Luna discovered that her capacity for genuine love expanded as her need for love decreased. When friends called with problems, she listened with full attention rather than seeing their distress as an opportunity to prove her value. When she encountered someone interesting, she enjoyed the connection without immediately strategizing how to make it permanent. When people made choices that took them away from her, she felt natural sadness, but not the devastating abandonment that had once characterized her. Response to separation. The lighthouse stood as it always had, steady and reliable on its cliff above the ocean. But now it reflected its keeper's transformation, offering guidance generously while remaining rooted in its own foundation, serving others while honoring its own structure, shining brightly not to attract but simply because radiance was its nature. Luna's new reality was built on the revolutionary foundation that she was already complete, already worthy, already valuable exactly as she was. This wasn't a belief she forced herself to accept, but a recognition that emerged naturally as she stopped seeking evidence of her worth in others' decisions to stay or go. She was discovering that wholeness wasn't something to be achieved, but something to be uncovered, like sea glass polished by waves until its essential clarity was revealed. The transformation from pursuit to presence manifested most clearly in how Luna began to speak to herself. The internal voice that had once cataloged her failures and inadequacies, that had provided running commentary on what she should do differently to make others stay, began to soften into something resembling compassion. Luna started noticing her self-talk the way she might notice weather patterns with interest, but without immediate judgment. When the old voice would whisper, Maybe if you had been more interesting, Sarah wouldn't have needed space. Luna learned to respond with gentle curiosity rather than automatic agreement. That's an interesting thought, she would say to herself. I wonder what evidence there is for that belief. This shift from self-attack to self-inquiry opened space for a different kind of internal dialogue. Instead of berating herself for past mistakes in relationships, Luna began asking more useful questions. What did I learn from that experience? How did that relationship teach me something about my own patterns? What would I do differently now, not to make someone stay, but to honor my own authenticity? The practice of emotional regulation became an art form rather than a desperate struggle. When waves of loneliness or anxiety arose, Luna learned to greet them like weather systems passing through temporary, natural, not requiring immediate fixing or avoidance. She developed a repertoire of responses that honored her feelings without being overwhelmed by them. On evenings when the cottage felt too quiet, instead of frantically reaching out to anyone who might provide distraction, Luna would light candles and ask herself what the silence was trying to tell her. Sometimes it revealed exhaustion that needed rest. Sometimes it highlighted creativity wanting expression. Sometimes it simply wanted to be experienced fully, like a piece of music that required quiet, listening to be appreciated. Luna's approach to difficult emotions became increasingly sophisticated. When sadness visited, she learned to sit with it, like a friend who needed witnessing rather than advice. When anger arose about past betrayals or disappointments, she allowed it to be present without immediately trying to transform it into understanding or forgiveness. When fear whispered about future abandonment, she acknowledged its protective intention while gently reminding it that she was safe in the present moment. The art of boundary setting emerged naturally from her growing self-respect. Luna no longer said yes to invitations that drained her energy just because she feared saying no might end a friendship. She stopped making herself available at all hours for friends' crises while neglecting her own needs for rest and solitude. She began to understand that healthy boundaries weren't walls that kept others out. They were gardens that kept her authentic self tended and nourished. When her friend Marcus called late one evening, crying about his latest relationship drama, Luna listened with genuine compassion but didn't abandon her own bedtime routine to spend hours on the phone as she once would have. I care about you, and I can hear that you're hurting, she said kindly. I need to go to sleep now, but I'm available to talk more tomorrow evening if you'd like to call then. The old Luna would have seen this boundary as selfish, as evidence that she wasn't a good friend. The new Luna recognized it as loving both Marcus and herself, offering genuine presence within sustainable limits, rather than resentful availability that would eventually burn out. Luna's relationship with solitude became a source of strength rather than something to be endured between social connections. She developed rituals for enjoying her own company, elaborate Sunday breakfasts eaten slowly while reading, evening walks along the beach with her camera, afternoon painting sessions in the lighthouse tower with music playing softly. These weren't activities to fill time until someone else became available. They were appointments with herself that she looked forward to, and protected. Self-compassion became Luna's default response to mistakes and imperfections. When she burned dinner or painted something that didn't match her vision or played a song with numerous mistakes, instead of harsh self-criticism, she found herself responding with the same kindness she would offer a friend. That's okay, you're learning, became her new internal mantra. Mistakes are part of the process, not evidence of inadequacy. This gentle approach to her own learning curve extended to her social interactions. When conversations didn't flow smoothly, or when she said something that felt awkward, Luna stopped replaying the scenes endlessly, searching for evidence that she had ruined the connection. Instead, she reminded herself that authentic relationships could withstand imperfection, that genuine friends weren't looking for reasons to leave, that her value as a person wasn't determined by conversational perfection. Luna's growing wisdom manifested in her ability to distinguish between connection and attachment. She could enjoy deep conversations with new acquaintances without immediately planning how to maintain the relationship. She could appreciate time with existing friends without monitoring their mood for signs of withdrawal. She could feel affection for people without needing to own or control their presence in her life. This detachment wasn't indifference. It was freedom. Freedom to love without the desperate edge of need. To connect without the exhausting weight of expectation. To care without the crushing responsibility of outcomes. Luna began to understand that the deepest love was often expressed through release rather than possession, through trust rather than control. Her relationship with uncertainty transformed from terror to curiosity, not knowing whether someone would call back, whether a new acquaintance would become a friend, whether a friendship would last forever. These unknowns stopped feeling like threats and started feeling like open space for natural development. Luna learned to find peace in the mystery of human connection rather than constantly trying to force certainty through control. The lighthouse beam's nightly rotation became a perfect metaphor for Luna's new approach to relationships. The light swept across the ocean consistently, offering guidance to any vessel that might need it, but it didn't chase after ships or try to hold them in its beam. It simply maintained its presence, trusted its purpose, and allowed the natural flow of arrivals and departures without taking any of it personally. Luna's facial expressions began to change as internal peace replaced constant vigilance. The slight furrow between her eyebrows that had developed from years of monitoring others' moods began to smooth. Her smile became more natural, less performed. Her eyes lost the searching quality that had characterized her interactions and gained a steadiness that reflected inner contentment. When she caught glimpses of herself in mirrors, Luna sometimes barely recognized the person looking back. Not because she had changed dramatically in appearance, but because the energy behind her face was completely different. She looked like someone who belonged to herself, someone who was home in her own skin, someone who knew her own worth without requiring external confirmation. This embodied wisdom attracted different kinds of connections. People began responding to Luna's grounded presence rather than her eager availability. Conversations became more authentic as Luna stopped performing and started simply being. Friendships developed organically around shared interests, rather than Luna's ability to anticipate and meet others' needs. The most profound shift was Luna's recognition that she had been the person she was seeking all along. The qualities she had desperately wanted others to provide: consistency, reliability, kindness, understanding, acceptance she could offer to herself. She was discovering that self-love wasn't narcissism but the foundation that made genuine love of others possible. Luna's transformation began to ripple outward like circles expanding from a stone dropped in still water, touching the lives of everyone in her orbit in ways both subtle and profound. The lighthouse keeper, who had once exhausted herself pursuing others, now stood as a beacon of self-possession that naturally attracted authentic connection. The first person to notice the naturally attracted authentic connection. The first person to notice the yin ni that asked pert as a beacon of self-possession that naturally attracted authentic connection. The first person to notice the yin change was Thomas, the elderly fisherman who had been bringing his boat to Serenity Bay for decades. He had always appreciated Luna's helpful nature, but he had also sensed her underlying desperation, the way she seemed to be constantly auditioning for approval. Now, when he docked for supplies or shelter from storms, he found Luna present in a completely different way. "You seem settled," Thomas observed one morning as Luna helped him secure his lines without the anxious hovering that had once characterized her assistance. "Like you found your anchor." Luna smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. "I think I've finally learned the difference between being helpful and being needed," she replied. "Turns out, the first one feels much better." Thomas nodded with the wisdom of someone who had spent years alone on the ocean. "A good lighthouse doesn't chase after ships," he said. "It just shines steady and trusts that's enough." The transformation affected Luna's existing friendships in unexpected ways. Sarah, who had asked for space, eventually reached out after several weeks of silence. But instead of finding the usual Luna eager, apologetic, ready to do whatever, it took to rebuild the connection, she encountered someone who was genuinely pleased to hear from her, but not desperate for reconciliation. "I'm glad you called," Luna said when Sarah suggested they meet for coffee. "I've missed our friendship, and I've also been learning a lot about myself during this time apart." Sarah later told mutual friends that the conversation had been unlike any they'd ever had. Luna listened without immediately trying to fix Sarah's problems, shared her own experiences without performing or seeking approval, and seemed comfortable with natural pauses in the conversation rather than frantically filling every silence. Most surprisingly, when Sarah mentioned she might need to travel for work soon, Luna responded with genuine interest and support, rather than thinly veiled anxiety about being left behind again. The quality of Luna's new connections began to reflect her inner transformation. A few weeks after her breakthrough with James the sailor, Luna met Elena, a traveling artist who had anchored in Serenity Bay while painting coastal landscapes. The old Luna would have immediately begun the familiar dance of making herself indispensable, offering excessive hospitality and trying to convince Elena to extend her stay. Instead, Luna simply offered what felt natural, a recommendation for the best light for morning painting, an invitation to use the lighthouse tower for elevated perspectives if Elena was interested, and genuine curiosity about the artist's work and travels. When Elena mentioned she would be leaving in a few days, Luna felt natural sadness at the brevity of their connection, but no urge to manipulate circumstances to make her stay longer. Elena was so struck by Luna's authentic presence that she asked if she could paint Luna's portrait, not as a lighthouse keeper performing her role, but as a woman who seemed completely at home in her own skin. The resulting painting captured something Luna had never seen in photographs of herself: confidence without performance, beauty without desperation, presence without need. Luna's transformation began to influence the entire community of Serenity. At the monthly town meetings, instead of volunteering for every committee and project in an attempt to prove her value, Luna chose involvement based on genuine interest and available energy. When she did contribute, her input was more thoughtful and her commitment more sustainable. The local coffee shop owner, Pearl, noticed the change immediately. "You used to come in looking like you were waiting for something," Pearl observed. "Now you come in like you're exactly where you want to be." Luna's shift from seeking to offering created space for others to be authentic as well. Friends stopped feeling pressure to respond to her messages immediately or to include her in every social event. The freedom from Luna's unconscious emotional demands allowed relationships to develop more naturally, with reciprocity emerging organically rather than being forced through guilt or obligation. Marina, her wise mentor, visited one afternoon and found Luna painting watercolors in her garden, completely absorbed in capturing the play of light on autumn leaves. Marina watched for several minutes before Luna noticed her presence, struck by the quality of attention Luna brought to her artistic practice. "This is what I hoped you would discover," Marina said, settling beside Luna on the garden bench. "The difference between doing something to fill emptiness and doing something because it brings you alive." Luna looked at her painting, imperfect but genuinely expressive, then at Marina. "I'm starting to understand that I was never empty," she said. "I was just looking in the wrong direction for fullness." The lighthouse itself seemed to reflect Luna's transformation. Visitors to Serenity Bay began commenting on the exceptionally welcoming atmosphere, the sense of peace that radiated from Beacon Point. The light appeared brighter, more steady, more trustworthy. Ship's captains started recommending the harbor to other sailors, not because of exceptional services or amenities, but because of the quality of sanctuary it provided. Luna's photography began attracting attention from tourists who found her images of Serenity Bay on social media. Instead of desperately promoting her work to gain followers, Luna simply shared what brought her joy: sunrise over the lighthouse, storm clouds gathering over the ocean, wildflowers in her garden, the play of light through sea glass. Her authentic passion for her surroundings drew people who shared her appreciation for coastal beauty. A travel blogger who visited Serenity Bay wrote about the lighthouse keeper who seemed to embody the peaceful energy of the place itself. Luna doesn't try to convince you to stay longer, the blogger wrote. She simply makes the time you're there so genuinely pleasant that you naturally want to return. The most profound ripple effect was Luna's influence on other women who struggled with similar patterns of pursuit and self-abandonment. Word spread quietly through the networks that connect women who recognize each other's struggles. They began seeking out the lighthouse keeper who had learned to stop chasing. Curious about her transformation, Luna found herself naturally becoming a mentor, not through formal teaching, but through authentic example. When women visited seeking advice about difficult relationships or patterns of people-pleasing, Luna didn't offer quick fixes or psychological techniques. Instead, she shared her own story with honest vulnerability, demonstrated what self-companionship looked like in practice, and reflected back their own wisdom rather than trying to provide answers from outside. The lighthouse beam continued its nightly rotation, but now it seemed to carry a different message across the waters. Instead of a desperate signal for others to notice and approach, it had become a steady reminder that true illumination comes from within, that authentic service flows from fullness rather than emptiness, that love expresses itself most purely when it asks for nothing in return. Luna's transformation had created expanding circles of permission for others to be authentic, to set boundaries, to enjoy their own company, to love without attachment, to serve without sacrifice. The lighthouse keeper who had learned to stop chasing people who leave had become a beacon for others seeking their own way home to themselves. 6 months into her transformation, Luna encountered the parts of herself she had spent decades trying to hide, not from others, but from herself. The shadow integration began on a stormy evening when she received news that her mother, Elena, had died suddenly in a distant city, alone except for the hospital staff who had tried unsuccessfully to contact any family. The grief that arose was not simple sadness for a lost relationship, but a complex mixture of pain, anger, relief, and something she had never allowed herself to feel toward her mother: fury. Luna had spent her entire adult life unconsciously seeking her mother's love from everyone she met, trying to prove through perfect devotion that she was worth staying for. Now, faced with the finality of death, she could no longer maintain the fiction that Elena had been a wounded woman doing her best. Standing in the lighthouse tower while rain lashed the windows, Luna allowed herself to feel the full force of her rage at the woman who had taught her that love was conditional, that worth was earned through performance, that people leave when you're not enough. For the first time, she spoke aloud the words she had never permitted herself to think. You were selfish. You chose your own adventure over your daughter. You broke something in me that took 30 years to repair. The anger felt dangerous, primitive, completely at odds with the compassionate, understanding person Luna had worked so hard to become. But as she stood with the storm outside matching the tempest within, she realized that denying her shadow emotions had been part of what made her so desperately hungry for others' approval. She had been trying to be only light, only love, only. acceptance, but wholeness required integration of all her parts, including the ones that were angry, disappointed, and righteously indignant. Luna's fury expanded beyond her mother to encompass all the people who had taken her excessive giving for granted, who had allowed her to exhaust herself in service to their needs while offering little in return. She felt anger at David, the musician who had let her fund his dreams while keeping one foot perpetually out the door. She felt rage at friends who had leaned on her support during their crises, but had little time for her when she needed understanding. Most difficult of all, Luna felt anger at herself, at the decades of self-abandonment, at the way she had made herself small and accommodating, at her willingness to betray her own needs in pursuit of others' approval. This self-directed fury was the hardest to accept because it challenged her identity as a loving, giving person. But as Luna allowed these shadow emotions to move through her without judgment, something remarkable happened. The anger didn't consume her or make her bitter. It clarified her boundaries. The rage didn't turn her into a victim. It revealed her power. The fury didn't close her heart. It showed her where she had been giving love from obligation rather than authentic choice. In the weeks that followed Elena's death, Luna discovered that embracing her shadow emotions actually made her more loving, not less. When she acknowledged her capacity for anger, she could love others without requiring them to be perfect. When she owned her disappointment about past relationships, she could engage in new connections without the desperate need to prove they would be different. Luna began to see that her people-pleasing behavior had actually contained significant aggression. The passive-aggressive manipulation of trying to make others feel guilty for not reciprocating her excessive giving. The subtle ways she had tried to control others through her service. The unconscious anger she carried when her emotional investments didn't yield the returns she expected. Recognizing these shadow aspects allowed Luna to clean up her motivations for giving. She could now distinguish between service that flowed from genuine love and service that was designed to create obligation. She could feel when her helpfulness was authentic and when it was a strategy for gaining approval. This awareness didn't make her less generous. It made her generosity more pure. The lighthouse tower became Luna's shadow work sanctuary, a place where she could feel all her emotions without judgment. She wrote letters to her mother that would never be sent, expressing decades of accumulated hurt and disappointment. She painted abstract watercolors that captured her anger in slashes of red and black. She played fierce, discordant music on her guitar that honored the parts of her that were not sweet or accommodating. As Luna integrated her shadow, she became paradoxically more attractive to others, not because she was performing perfection, but because she was embodying authenticity. People sensed that she could handle the full spectrum of human emotion, that she wouldn't require them to be anything other than genuinely themselves. Her capacity to be real made it safe for others to drop their own performances. The woman who emerged from this shadow integration was neither the desperate people-pleaser she had been nor the spiritually bypassing love and lighter she might have become. She was complex, real, capable of fierce boundaries and tender compassion, honest about her needs and generous with her gifts. She had learned to love herself not despite her imperfections, but including them, not by transcending her humanity, but by embracing it fully. Luna's integration of her shadow emotions opened a doorway to something she had never expected to find: her authentic purpose. For decades, she had been so focused on making others stay that she had never asked herself a fundamental question. What am I here to do that has nothing to do with anyone else's approval or presence? The answer began to emerge during her daily lighthouse duties, which she now performed with a different quality of attention. Instead of obsessively maintaining equipment that was already functioning perfectly, Luna began to really see the lighthouse as a work of art, a technological marvel, a testament to human ingenuity in service of safe passage. She started researching The history of lighthouse technology, fascinated by the evolution of lenses and light sources, captivated by stories of lighthouse keepers who had saved countless lives through their dedication. This growing passion led Luna to begin documenting the lighthouse's operations through photography and writing, not for social media approval or to attract visitors, but from genuine fascination with the intersection of engineering and service, technology and care. She found herself staying up late reading about lighthouse design, experimenting with ways to photograph the play of light through the massive lens, writing detailed observations about weather patterns and their effect on visibility. Luna's artistic practice evolved from hobby to calling as she discovered her gift for capturing the emotional essence of coastal landscapes. Her watercolors began to convey not just the visual beauty of Serenity Bay, but the feeling of belonging to the natural world, the sense of being held by forces larger than individual human drama. Gallery owners who visited the area started asking about her work, not because she was promoting it, but because it radiated an authenticity that was impossible to ignore. The lighthouse itself began to feel like a collaborator in Luna's emerging purpose. She realized that she had been given stewardship of something extraordinary, a beacon that had guided ships safely for over a century, a structure that embodied the perfect balance of solitude and service. Her role wasn't just to maintain the equipment. It was to honor the lighthouse's legacy while bringing her own gifts to its continued evolution. Luna started offering informal tours to visitors who showed genuine interest in lighthouse history and coastal ecology. These weren't scheduled events designed to generate income or social connection, but spontaneous sharing that arose when she encountered fellow enthusiasts. Her knowledge was deep and her passion infectious, creating experiences that visitors remembered long after leaving Serenity Bay. The integration of her artistic and lighthouse-keeping vocations led to an unexpected opportunity. A marine conservation organization approached Luna about creating educational materials that would help people understand the vital role lighthouses played in both maritime safety and coastal ecosystem preservation. The project combined her growing expertise in lighthouse technology with her artistic ability to make complex information accessible and emotionally engaging. Working on this project, Luna discovered a capacity for focused attention that she had never accessed while scattered across multiple relationships and social obligations. Hours would pass unnoticed as she researched tidal patterns or experimented with ways to illustrate the physics of light refraction. This deep absorption felt completely different from the anxious busyness that had characterized her people-pleasing years. Luna's purpose crystallized around the concept of illuminated service, offering her gifts fully while remaining unattached to how they were received. Like the lighthouse beam that swept consistently across the waters, whether ships were present or not, Luna began to understand that her job was to shine her light with absolute consistency, trusting that those who needed her guidance would be able to find it. This alignment between her inner nature and her outer expression created a magnetic quality that drew the right people and opportunities effortlessly. Marine biologists began consulting with her about coastal observation techniques. Artists sought her out for residencies that combined creative practice with lighthouse stewardship. Publishers expressed interest in her project, documenting the intersection of technology and nature in lighthouse operations. The most profound aspect of Luna's soul alignment was the discovery that her deepest fulfillment came not from being chosen by others, but from choosing to develop her gifts, to honor her fascinations, to serve something larger than her personal need for connection. The lighthouse had taught her that true purpose flows from inner radiance rather than external validation. Luna began to understand that her years of seeking completion through relationships had actually been a misdirected spiritual impulse, the soul's desire to experience unity, to transcend the illusion of separation, to touch something eternal. But instead of seeking this connection through merger with other people, She could find it through alignment with her authentic purpose, through service to something greater than her individual desires. Standing in the lighthouse tower at sunset, watching the beam begin its nightly rotation, Luna felt a deep settling, a coming home to herself that had nothing to do with geography and everything to do with finally understanding her place in the larger web of existence. She was not meant to be someone's harbor. She was meant to be a lighthouse offering guidance, maintaining presence, serving the collective navigation of all souls, seeking safe passage through the darkness thought as winter deepened around serenity. Luna's transformation reached its most profound dimension. The recognition that her journey from pursuit to presence had been, fundamentally, a spiritual awakening. Standing in the lighthouse tower on the winter solstice, watching the beam cut through the longest night of the year, she felt herself dissolving into something larger than her individual story. The realization came not as a dramatic revelation, but as a gentle recognition, like recognizing a face that had always been familiar but never clearly seen. Every step of her journey, the years of desperate seeking, the painful pattern of pursuit, the gradual awakening to self-sufficiency, the integration of shadow and light, all of it had been leading to this moment of understanding that separation had always been an illusion. Luna saw clearly that her pursuit of others had been the ego's interpretation of a genuine spiritual impulse, the soul's recognition that it belonged to something infinitely larger than the individual self. But instead of seeking this unity through merger with the cosmic wholeness of which she was always already a part, she had tried to find it through possession of other separate beings, who were equally seeking the same impossible completion through externals. The lighthouse beam became a perfect metaphor for consciousness itself, individual awareness expressing universal love, personal presence serving collective navigation, human radiance participating in the infinite light that illuminates all existence. Luna understood that she had never been separate from the love she sought. She had simply been looking for it in the wrong direction. This transcendent recognition didn't diminish the importance of human relationships, but transformed her understanding of their purpose. Connections with others became opportunities to recognize the shared essence beneath apparent differences, to celebrate the universal consciousness expressing itself through infinite individual forms, to experience the joy of temporary companionship without the suffering of imagined separation. Luna felt herself held by something vast and benevolent, not just the immediate beauty of the coastal landscape, but the entire cosmic dance of which her small story was an integral part. The waves that crashed against the cliffs below carried the same energy that moved her breath. The stars that emerged in the darkening sky shared the same fundamental essence as her awareness. The light that flowed from her lighthouse participated in the same illumination that made all existence visible. The loneliness that had driven her desperate pursuit dissolved completely, replaced by a felt sense of belonging to everything. The lighthouse and the ocean, the migrating birds, and the ancient cliffs, the ships that passed in the night, and the stars that guided their navigation. She was not alone and had never been alone. She was a unique expression of the same life force that animated all existence. This cosmic perspective brought profound peace to Luna's relationship history. She could see that every person who had entered and left her life had been playing their perfect role in her awakening. Even her mother's abandonment, even David's casual betrayal, even Sarah's request for space. All of it had been necessary to bring her to this moment of recognizing her inherent completeness, her eternal connection to the source of all love. Luna's daily activities became expressions of devotion rather than tasks to be completed. Tending the lighthouse was caring for a sacred altar of service. Painting watercolors was participating in the cosmic creativity that continuously births new forms. Walking on the beach was communing with the eternal rhythm that moves tides and seasons and human hearts. Even simple activities like making tea or reading books became opportunities to celebrate the miracle of consciousness experiencing itself through infinite variety. That the fear of abandonment that had governed her relationships disappeared entirely, replaced by trust in the fundamental benevolence of existence. She understood that nothing real could be lost, because everything was part of an eternal unfolding, that people appeared and disappeared in her life according to perfect timing that served the evolution of all souls involved. That love was not something to be captured, but something to be continuously expressed and received. Luna's presence began to radiate a quality that others found both peaceful and transformative. Visitors to the lighthouse spoke of feeling unexpectedly moved by their brief interactions with her, as if her simple authenticity reminded them of something they had forgotten about their own essential nature. She had become a living demonstration that fulfillment comes not from getting love, but from being love. Not from finding completion in others, but from recognizing the completeness that had always been present. The lighthouse beam swept across waters that held no memory of yesterday's storms and no anxiety about tomorrow's weather, offering guidance to whatever vessels might need it while remaining perfectly content whether ships approached or sailed on. Luna had learned to be like that beam, steady in her radiance, generous in her offering, complete in her presence, at peace with the eternal dance of arrival and departure that characterized all manifest existence. 1 year after Luna's profound transformation, Serenity Bay experienced something unprecedented. A gathering of lighthouse keepers from across the coastal regions, drawn together not by formal invitation, but by the mysterious magnetism that authentic wisdom creates. They arrived in small boats and weathered vessels, carrying with them decades of experience in the art of guidance without attachment, service without sacrifice. Luna found herself naturally assuming the role of host, not from her old desperate need to please, but from the genuine joy of sharing what she had learned with those who understood the unique calling of lighthouse keeping. As evening settled over the bay and the assembled keepers gathered in her cottage, she realized that her personal transformation had become something larger, a living example of how one person's journey home to themselves could illuminate the path for others. The oldest keeper among them was Captain Morrison, who had tended lighthouses for 47 years across 3 different coastlines. His weathered hands held a lifetime of stories about storms weathered and ships guided safely home. As he listened to Luna describe her journey from pursuit to presence, his eyes reflected the deep recognition of someone who had witnessed many souls learn the difference between desperate signaling and authentic illumination. "You've discovered the ancient secret," Captain Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent in solitary service. "Most people think lighthouse keeping is about making ships want to stay. But the real art is learning to be so completely present in your own light that you become a reference point for others' navigation, whether they're arriving or departing." Luna shared her story with the gathered keepers. The years of chasing after love, the exhaustion of trying to make herself indispensable, the breakthrough moment when she realized she was meant to be a lighthouse rather than a harbor. As she spoke, she watched recognition dawn in faces around the circle, each keeper seeing their own journey reflected in her words. A younger keeper named Samuel shared his own recent awakening. "I spent 2 years after my divorce trying to turn my lighthouse into a tourist attraction," he said. "I thought if I could just get enough people to visit, to stay longer, to recommend my lighthouse to others, I could prove my worth. But the more I chased visitors, the more my beacon suffered." The light became secondary to the performance. Marina, who had mentored Luna through her transformation, listened from her corner chair with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had witnessed a soul remember its true nature. "Every lighthouse keeper must eventually choose," she said softly. "They can exhaust themselves trying to control who approaches their shore, or they can master the art of consistent illumination and trust that their light will serve whoever needs it, whenever they need it. The conversation deepened as the evening progressed, each keeper sharing the specific ways their calling had taught them about healthy detachment. They spoke of storms weathered alone but not lonely, of ships guided to safety with no expectation, of gratitude, of the profound peace that comes from serving something larger than personal need for recognition. Luna realized that her cottage had become a temporary sanctuary for souls who understood the delicate balance between solitude and service, between individual completeness and generous offering. These keepers had all learned, through various trials and awakenings, that their value was not determined by how many ships sought their harbor, but by the quality of guidance they provided to whatever vessels appeared on their horizon. As the night deepened and the lighthouse beam began its eternal rotation, the gathering naturally shifted into a more mystical space. The keepers shared stories of profound moments when their individual service had connected them to something universal, times when tending their lighthouse had felt like participating in a cosmic function that extended far beyond maritime safety. There's something about this work that opens you to the eternal, reflected Keeper Elena, whose lighthouse had guided vessels through treacherous northern waters for 15 years. When you're alone with the elements night after night, maintaining a light that could mean the difference between life and death for strangers you'll never meet, you start to understand that you're part of something sacred. Luna felt the truth of this deeply. A transformation from desperate pursuit to authentic presence had been more than personal healing. It had been a spiritual awakening disguised as relationship recovery. The lighthouse had taught her that individual consciousness, when aligned with its true purpose, becomes a vehicle for universal love to express itself in the world. The gathered keepers began to speak of their lighthouses as meditation practices, their nightly duties as forms of devotion, their solitary service as participation in the divine function of guidance and protection. Luna understood that she had joined an ancient tradition of souls who had learned to find fulfillment not in being chosen by others, but in choosing to serve the safe passage of all beings. As the evening reached its natural conclusion, Captain Marson offered a blessing that seemed to encapsulate the wisdom of the gathering. May your lights burn steady and bright, not to make others stay, but to help them find their way. May your presence be so grounded in truth that it becomes a blessing to every soul that encounters it, whether they approach your shore or sail beyond your horizon. The keepers departed the next morning with the same natural rhythm they had arrived. No elaborate goodbyes, no promises of reunion, no grasping after the connection they had shared. They carried with them the reinforcement of their calling and the recognition that Luna's lighthouse had become a beacon not just for ships, but for other souls learning to serve from fullness rather than emptiness. Luna stood on her dock, watching the last vessel disappear beyond the horizon, feeling not the familiar ache of abandonment but the warm satisfaction of having offered genuine hospitality. She had learned to trust that meaningful connections would return when timing was perfect. That forcing reunion diminished the beauty of natural cycling. That love expressed itself most purely through blessing others' journeys rather than trying to control their destinations. The lighthouse continued its rotation, as it had for over a century, as it would for centuries to come. Luna had become its worthy keeper, not because she had learned to make others stay, but because she had remembered how to be a steady light in the darkness, offering guidance to all while belonging completely to herself. Her transformation was complete, but her service was eternal, radiating outward in ever-expanding circles of influence that would touch souls she would never meet, in ways she would never know. For as long as her light continued to shine, as spring returned to serenity, Luna stood in her lighthouse tower one evening, no longer the woman who had once desperately chased ships across the horizon. The beam rotated with its eternal rhythm, and she felt the profound stillness that comes when someone has finally arrived home to themselves. Sarah had returned to her life, but as a friend choosing connection rather than someone Luna needed to. Convinced to stay, David had sent a letter from his new city, expressing gratitude for her support and sharing news of his growing success. Luna had felt genuine happiness for him without any trace of the old resentment or longing. Marina visited regularly, their friendship deepening in the spacious way that becomes possible when neither person needs anything from the other except the simple pleasure of authentic companionship. New people entered Luna's orbit, naturally artists, drawn to her creative vision, lighthouse enthusiasts fascinated by her knowledge, travelers seeking the peaceful sanctuary that Serenity Bay had become known for. But Luna no longer hoarded these connections or monitored them for signs of permanence. She offered her gifts freely and received others' presents as the temporary blessing it was meant to be. The lighthouse itself had been featured in several maritime publications, not because Luna promoted it, but because its reputation for exceptional guidance had spread organically through the sailing community. Ship's captains spoke of the unusual sense of peace they felt when anchoring in Serenity Bay. The way the lighthouse keeper's presence seemed to embody the very qualities that made the harbor feel like a sanctuary. Luna's artistic work had evolved into a calling that supported her both financially and spiritually. Her documentation of lighthouse operations and coastal ecosystems was being compiled into a book that would preserve the wisdom of traditional navigation while celebrating the eternal beauty of the marriage between human service and natural grandeur. But perhaps the most significant change was invisible to outside observers: the quality of Luna's inner landscape. Where once there had been constant monitoring and anxiety, now there was spacious awareness. Where once there had been desperate seeking, now there was confident offering. Where once there had been the exhausting performance of worthiness, now there was the simple truth of inherent value. Luna had learned the secret that the lighthouse had been teaching all along. Illumination is not about making others stay, but about shining so authentically that everyone who encounters your light is helped along their own journey, whether that journey leads toward you or away from you. She had discovered that the love she had been seeking through others had always been flowing through her, waiting only for her to stop running long enough to receive it. The woman who had once chased people who leave had become someone others sought when they were ready to stop running themselves. As Luna's story settles into the quiet satisfaction of completion, feel how it resonates within your own heart, your own history of seeking love in external places, your own journey toward the recognition of inherent worth. Her transformation from desperate pursuit to radiant presence is not just her story. It is the story available to every soul who has ever felt the pain of chasing those who walk away. Notice how your body responds to the image of Luna in her lighthouse, complete in herself, yet generously offering guidance to any who might need it. Feel the possibility of that same groundedness available to you right now, not as something to achieve, but as something to remember. Not as a future goal, but as a present reality waiting to be uncovered. Luna's lighthouse beam sweeps across the waters of your consciousness, illuminating the understanding that you, too, are already whole, already worthy, already complete, exactly as you are. The love you have been seeking exists within you as surely as light exists within the lighthouse, not dependent on others' recognition, but radiant by its very nature. Allow yourself to feel the relief of no longer needing to chase, the peace of trusting your own inner guidance, the joy of offering your gifts without attachment to how they are received. Luna's journey becomes your permission to stop running after those who leave and start walking toward the magnificent completeness that has always been your true home. Her story lives in you now, a reminder that lighthouses don't chase ships, they simply shine with such authentic radiance that they become beacons of hope for all who sail the sometimes stormy waters of human connection. You are that lighthouse. You have always been that lighthouse. Luna's awakening is your awakening. waiting to be claimed. Let Luna's peace become your peace now. A lighthouse, your sanctuary, a journey home to herself, the path your own consciousness follows as you drift toward healing sleep. Feel yourself standing with her in that tower of self-possession, the beam of your own inner light rotating with perfect consistency, offering its guidance whether witnessed or not. Your body settles into the rhythm of waves against the cliff, the eternal pulse that rocks all beings toward rest, toward renewal, toward the deep restoration that comes when we finally stop seeking completion outside ourselves and recognize the wholeness that has always been present within, like the lighthouse that functions perfectly, whether tended anxiously or lovingly. Your worth continues to shine steadily as you release the day's efforts, the week's pursuits, the lifetime's seeking into the vast ocean of universal love that holds all stories, all journeys, all souls in its infinite embrace. The beam of consciousness that you are continues its rotation even as your personal awareness settles into sleep, offering its unique light to the collective navigation of all beings, while resting in the knowledge that you are eternally connected to the source of all illumination. Your breath deepens with the rhythm of tides. Your heartbeat slows to match the patient timing of seasons. Your entire being relaxes into the trust that you are held by forces far greater and more loving than any individual relationship could provide. Sleep comes naturally to the lighthouse keeper who knows her worth, who has learned to love without chasing, who offers her gifts freely while remaining rooted in her own unshakable foundation. Rest comes easily to the one who has stopped seeking harbor in others and discovered the eternal sanctuary within. Let sleep carry you home to yourself. As Luna found her way home, as the lighthouse beam guides all souls safely through the darkness toward the dawn of their own awakening.